Hey, today we're going to talk about 2D arrays or two-dimensional arrays. We'll show you, going to review a little bit of embedded loops or nested loops, and then we'll describe what a 2D array is, create and populate it, and manipulate some data in the array. Okay, so just a little review of something that is nested. Anytime you have an if statement inside of an if statement, that is considered a nested if statement. So here they have an if statement. Inside there's the opening squiggly closing brackets, but this second if statement is nested inside of this first if statement. So the only way this second if statement will execute is if this first condition is already true. Now you can have a nested loop as well. Here's an example of a nested loop. I've got a for loop inside it, and it's nested inside a for loop. This is considered the inner loop, and this outside portion is considered the outer loop. So take a look at this a little bit in detail. How many iterations will this inner loop make? Pause the video if you want to think about it for a sec. Well, if you look at it, this outer loop is executing 10 times. This inner loop is executing 10 times. But this inner loop is although it's iterating 10 times, it's executing 10 times as well. So this print statement is going to be 10 times 10 times, or it's going to execute 100 times. Let's kind of show you how that works with a smaller example. Okay, so here in this example, I've got I starting count at 1, and it's going to 3. And this inner loop is starting at 1 and counting to 4. So the very first time it comes through, when I is 1, then it's going to come into this inner loop, and j is going to be 1. And then it will do the print statement. It's going to system.out.print, and it will print out I times j, or in this case 1 times 1, so it would show 1. Then this inner loop is still executing. It's going to go to 2, and then it will print out its command, which is 1 times 2, and it will print out a 2. Then it's going to do the same thing. J is going to go to 3. It's going to print out 1 times 3, and it'll show 3. Then j becomes 4, and it will print out 1 times 4. Now, at this point, the loop is done, and it will do a system.out.print line, or basically it will enter down to the next line, and then it will come and do the second iteration of I. So now that we have the second iteration of I, that's a true statement, and j becomes 1 again. So it's going to do 2 times 1 and print out 2. Then it will do 2 times 2 and print out 4. And then 2 times 3 and print out 6. And then 2 times 4 and print out 4. As soon as it finishes that line, then it's going to go on to the third iteration, prints out an end line character, and then it will go to the third iteration of the outer loop. Then the inner loop's going to iterate 4 times again for 3, 6, 9, and 12. And then it will finish executing and be done with both loops. Okay, now let's show you what this has to do with 2D arrays. A 2D array is just an array, but instead of having a single list, it has 2 dimensions. So we have rows and we have columns. It's still a collection of items, just like an array. All of the items in the array or grid have the same data type, has the same name. The only difference is it has this table format instead of a list format. So if I wanted to find a value in my list, I could use my 2 sets of square brackets to find where it is in the list. So this says the first item is the rows and the second item is the columns, the second set of brackets, I should say. So on row 1, column 3, if I come over here, row 1, column 3, that gives me the value 6. And so that is what position 1, 3 is going to be located in our two-dimensional array here. Okay, so just a review on arrays. If you wanted to declare a 2D array with the values defined, you could use an initializer list. And to do that, all you'd do is you'd say int numbers, you have one set of square brackets, you name it, and you put in the values in your single dimension that you want to put in. So this is just the review. This is how we did it in the array chapter. Okay, now that we're in the 2D array chapter, we're going to do the same thing. But instead of defining just a single list, we're going to define a list of lists, basically, or 3 sets of numbers, however many sets of numbers you want. So in this case, like one of these is an array, but then there's commas on each line, and we have an opening squiggly bracket and a closing squiggly bracket and a semicolon in there to separate out all these lines. And so we'll put this in position 0, 0 right here, and then 1 and 2 and 3, and so far and so forth. So this is just the syntax for declaring an initializer list using a 2D array. And it will automatically scale the 2D array to the values that you put in. Okay, now suppose you wanted to you're not going to use an initializer list. This is not an initializer list. This would just be instantiating, instantiating. Oh, I cannot totally spell this. There we go, instantiating. So if we want to instantiate a list with no values, we will just say int, this time we have 2 sets of brackets, and we name it equals new int, and then it tells us how many rows and how many columns we have. So that would make a 2D array that looks like this with no values. Okay, you can also do a 2D array of characters. Here's an example of a little tic-tac-toe grid where I'm using characters. Since they're characters, I have to have them in single quotes. If I wanted a 2D array of strings, I would just put string here and put these in double quotes. So this is the initializer list. This is just the instantiation. You don't have to have both. This one just instantiates and populates. This one just says, hey, it's there, but all the values are empty. Okay, if you put your 2D array or your 1D array in as a class variable, you do want to put private in the beginning of it, since it's not going to be inside of a method. So that just makes it an instance variable. Okay, now so suppose you want to access an element in your 2D array. So what you're going to do is, here's an example. I'm going to set numbers of position 2, or excuse me, row 2, column 1, and I'm going to set it equal to 7. If I come over here and look, row 2 is going to be, this is row 0, this is row 1, this is row 2. That means this is column 0 and column 1. So it's saying I want to set this value to a 7. So if I hit click, it's now changed that value to a 7. So, and the reason it's setting the value is because number 01 is on this side of the equal sign. If I had put this, so it's setting the position. Okay, here's another example. I'm getting the value this time. I want to find out where position row 0, column 3 is. Take a wild guess, look at the list, pause if you need, tell me what value is going to be. So row 0, 0, 1, column 3 is going to be what? That is not correct. 0, 1, 2, 3. Interesting, my animation is off. Anyway, but that would not be 5. That would be 7 as well. That's this position right here. I got to change that animation. Okay, so here's an example. What is at position, this is just a little quiz for you. What's at position numbers 0, 1? 0, row 0, column 1 is going to be 13. Okay, what's at numbers 2, 3? 0, 1, 2. So this is row 2, 0, 1, 2, 3. That's going to be a 4. All right, what's at numbers 1, 2? Well, here we have row 0, row 1, 0, 1, 2. It should be that 21. Nice. To do. I can't remember. I think I'm still working on this slide, it looks like, because I have a to-do. Oh, yeah, I remember what I was going to do. We are going to show you how to find the length of the numbers and the rows. This is not a to-do. This is done. Okay, so if you want to know how many rows you have, you can say numbers.length, and that will give you the number of rows. If you want to know how many columns you have, you will say numbers open square bracket 0, or actually any of the numbers in here, and it will give you the number of columns. Do I have an example of this? Yeah, so here's our example. So we had a 2D array, and this is like an old slide from our single arrays, and what this was doing is setting every value in the list equal to a random number. It's counting from 0 to 52. Now if you remember, we could also put in the length here. I could say card list.length, and it would automatically go to 52 because my array size is 52. So that is an alternate, another way, a more efficient way of doing that. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing for a 2D array. The only difference is now we have two sets of loops, one to iterate the rows and one to iterate the columns, and it's setting each element in the array equal to a random number. Okay, so numbers.length represents how many rows there are, and numbers of 0.length represents how many columns they are. Now when I do this, I usually use r and c as my variables. So here I have r equals 0, r is less than however many rows we have. That way I know that this r represents rows and this c represents columns. And don't get these mixed up. Don't put an r++ here when you mean to have a c or a c++. Keep it the same. So the outer loop is going to have r all the way across, and the inner loop will have c all the way across. And so what this is doing is it's setting every position in your 2D array equal to a random number. Okay, so here it's go. Oh yeah, I put it through just like we did in the other loop. Only now, yeah, I can't remember why I did this. Okay, now, so what that was trying to show you though is this is how it's iterating through. It's iterating through row by row. Now if you look, I'm going to switch it. I'm going to put columns as the outer loop and rows as the inner loop. I'm still keeping my position here, row and column. Now when I bring my columns out, I have to make sure I put my open square brackets 0. It's in the wrong spot, isn't it? Wow, I've got lots of syntax errors in this code, in this PowerPoint today. It goes there. Sorry about that. All right. So in this particular one, I do have to have numbers of 0.length because this is going for columns. I can't just say numbers.length because that wouldn't be for columns. And then same thing here. Now what this is doing, since I have numbers of row and column, this is always rows, this is columns. Since the outer loop is columns, this time it's going to iterate up and down. So it's going to come through and set the values this way. And so that's the difference in positioning your outer loop and your inner loop. If you have your outer loop as rows, it's going to go across. If you have your outer loop as columns, it's going to go up and down. Okay, so that is it for 2D arrays. Hopefully this was helpful in helping you understand how they work, and we will see you in class.